I'm a little unexpectedly emotional this morning because I didn't know Ken and Cece were going to do that song. For those who don't know, I'll give a little bit more background as to what Cece was talking about that conversation that we had earlier in the week. My mother is 78 years old, and she is Japanese, and she watched Tokyo burn as a child from the mountains of Japan with her family, where they fled after Doolittle firebombed the city. She was in Japan when Hiroshima and Nagasaki were bombed by the United States. And in many ways, I think I'm still learning what that means and how that has shaped who I am today. Gnothi Sauton. These Greek words, which appeared on the Temple of Apollo, comprise what is likely the most famous maxim attributed to the oracle at Delphi. In English, the words are most commonly translated as "know thyself." This simple two-word phrase captures the heart of the most important, the most profound wisdom teaching of the ancient Greeks. Throughout Greek mythology, we see repeatedly that failure to truly know oneself always leads to disaster. Take, for example, the case of Oedipus. As many of us may be aware, things did not exactly end well for Mr. Oedipus. At the root of it all, Oedipus's tragic flaw, the cause of all his troubles, was his failure to know himself. He never knew his own true identity. If Oedipus had known that he was the son of King Laius and Queen Jocasta, he never would have killed his father. He never would have married his mother. He never would have brought a curse to the city of Thebes. He never would have driven stakes through his own eyes in order to make his external physical appearance conform to his internal spiritual state. If the Greeks are to be believed, if terrible results accrue when we fail to truly know ourselves, then a good question for us this morning is, does Unitarian Universalism know itself? After having spent a few decades of wandering around in a proverbial theological wilderness, we UUs, I think, are beginning to finally get greater clarity about ourselves, about who we really are, and thus resolve some of our ongoing identity struggles. As a faith tradition, Unitarian Universalism is relatively young, though Unitarianism and Universalism each have long histories and deep theological roots. The merger between American Unitarianism and American Universalism happened only back in 1961. So taken from that perspective, we are only about 56 years old. You compare that number to Christianity, Judaism, or Hinduism, and it is clear that we are basically a baby faith. At the very least, we are an adolescent faith. And like all adolescents, we've had to go through a period of finding ourselves. Like many adolescents, we have tried on many different identities. Part of our historical identity confusion is rooted, I think, in our proud self-identification as a liberal religion. The problem is that liberal is a really big word. It means about a dozen different things to half a dozen different people. For instance, a common definition for the term liberal is simply being open-minded, in the sense of being tolerant to other views. Now, in the context of questions traditionally posed and answered by religion, UUism is certainly one of, if not the most, open-minded. We are fiercely non-creedal, meaning we refuse to collectively make definitive statements of belief regarding the nature of the divine, which allows us then to be open to different views. Do you believe in one God? 3 in 1? Many gods? Everything is God? Nothing is God. It doesn't matter. Come be a Unitarian Universalist. What happens after we die? Nothing? Heaven? Reincarnation? Something else? Awesome. Come on in. Get your worship on. As a collective body, we intentionally refuse to take a hard stance on these religious questions, not because we think these questions and their answers aren't important. Rather, we think that the questions and answers are so important that we want to empower every individual with the freedom to come to their own conclusions regarding them without feeling coerced by their church community. And this theological open-mindedness results in a community of diverse opinions, which we all very much covet because we believe in the power of religious pluralism. We believe that such theological diversity makes us stronger. But there is a dark side to tolerance and liberal open-mindedness that UUism itself has struggled with in its past and even in its present. It's the shadow that's cast when the liberal principle of open-mindedness is applied fundamentalistically, when tolerance is cynically universalized, when open-mindedness is elevated, placed upon a pedestal as a supreme and absolute good, such that the drawing of any conclusion becomes a sin, and certainty about anything, whether scientific truths or moral propositions, is rejected. This is relativism run amok. In addressing this danger, I think it would behoove us all to recall another bit of ancient Greek wisdom. Things are best done in moderation. Or more bluntly, as Christian theologian G.K. Chesterton once put it, don't be so open-minded that your brains fall out. The fact is, not all matters should be open to being open, especially ad infinitum. There is, frankly, no reason to maintain an open mind to the proposition that 2 + 2 = 4. Since the beginning of human history, every time we have put 2 together with 2, it has always come back as 4. The question then is settled. Now, open-mindedness is what prompts you to listen to another voice conveying a new or novel proposition. But after listening to that other new voice and that novel proposition, you are still allowed as an individual, allowed if not expected, to draw a conclusion based on the best available evidence, and then to take reasonable action in light of that conclusion. Many times then, refusal to draw conclusions isn't an example of tolerance and open-mindedness. It's an example of laziness or possibly even cowardice. It becomes cowardice when we are talking often about questions of morality. Now, morality, believe it or not, is actually in some ways a lot like math. Not every question in math has been definitively settled, but many questions have. So it is with morality. Just as there is no reason to be open-minded and tolerant towards someone who tries to propose that 2 + 2 = 5, there is no reason to be open-minded and tolerant toward a neo-Nazi or an unhooded Klansman who claims that Jews are not people or that black people should be shipped back to Africa. There are not many sides to these issues. There are not multiple answers to these questions. There is no need for dialogue. There is no room for compromise. And I will be damned if I simply have to agree to disagree with hate. Absurdly applied, fundamentalistic open-mindedness to questions of settled morality lead to paralysis by analysis, because it opens up a bottomless rabbit hole of abstract philosophical debate tied to nothing real. Since there are no absolutely right or wrong answers, all positions are equally valid. Therefore, better not to take a hard stance on anything or condemn anyone. It is this kind of thinking that allows morality to devolve into a parlor game instead of a lived experience. And at this point in my life, I need a living morality and an embodied spirituality, not another academic debate, because there is too much at stake. As optimistic and hope-filled as we Unitarian Universalists strive to be, we must not, we cannot run away from the moral responsibility we bear to call that which is good, good, and that which is evil, evil. To pretend there is no real difference, To refuse to draw distinctions between good and evil is to live in bad faith. The ability to differentiate good and evil is a core aspect of what it means to be human. Now, according to the Bible and the story in the book of Genesis, this ability to distinguish good from evil is one of the first divine attributes that we humans claimed for ourselves. And if you know the story, you'll recall it cost us dearly. When Adam and Eve ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, it resulted in the pair being exiled from the Garden of Eden. In other words, humanity traded eternal life in paradise for the ability to know good from evil, right from wrong. We paid dearly for this ability. So from the perspective of the ancient Jews and the early Christians, there was nothing more precious, more valuable, more important than our ability to distinguish right from wrong. So let us not be afraid to call good good and evil evil, even when it is difficult, even when it rocks the boat, even when doing so may come at great personal cost. The loss of friends, family, career opportunities. Nobody ever said the moral path was easy, because obviously it's so much easier to pretend that evil isn't real, because denying the existence of evil absolves us of the moral responsibility to resist it. And that is a problem, even in UU churches, maybe especially in some UU churches. We Unitarian Universalists sometimes have a tendency to attract people who refuse to believe in the real existence of evil or immorality or wrong or sin or whatever word you may happen to choose to call it. This idea that there are no wrong choices in life, that there are no incorrect paths, this belief undergirds that old lie that so many of us have heard a million times. Unitarian Universalists can believe absolutely anything. No, we can't, especially if we're trying to live a life in good faith. One cannot, in good faith, be a moral agent in this world and abscond from our shared responsibility to make moral judgments about the world and how we choose to live in it. Just because Unitarian Universalism collectively keeps an open mind about the nature of God, that does not mean that our churches are completely 100% judgment-free zones. UUism, even in its angstiest existential and postmodern fits, was never meant to be a religion that completely eradicated morality or the idea that there is no difference between right and wrong. Though I will admit that perhaps to the casual outside observer, it may have looked that way. Now, what we did do, and what we have continued to do, is shift the axis of traditional morality away from the focus of more conservative faith systems, i.e., away from sex. In conservative faith systems, morality seems to have an inordinate preoccupation with issues related to sexuality. Who you are attracted to, who you actually have sex with, how you have sex, why you have sex, etc. Unitarian Universalists historically have declined to center morality around these questions. That is to say, within the boundaries of consent, UUism has concluded that there is nothing evil, immoral, or sinful about who you are attracted to, who you choose to love or have sex with, or what body you happen to find yourself in. Instead of centering morality and immorality around issues of human sexuality, Unitarian Universalism and other liberal faith traditions have recalibrated morality to center around the idea of oppression. Now, oppression can be a heavy word. It is a scary and distasteful word for some, but I don't think it need be. Oppression is really just a term of art that describes any force that blocks everyone from being free and equal. So racism is a form of oppression. And so racism is a clear moral evil. Racism is worthy of our judgment, worthy of our collective moral and religious condemnation. I don't want to be part of a religious faith tradition that says, well, we're going to be open-minded on the issue of racism. I want to be part of a faith tradition that declares racism unequivocally immoral. In evil, we must purge from our own hearts, from our laws, from our social structures, from our culture, and from our own theology. And if UUism can't say that, then I don't want to be a UU. In this context, open-mindedness isn't about being open to believing that hateful, oppressive propositions proffered by the powerful are of equal moral value to positions of love and justice and compassion and freedom. Open-mindedness in this context is the act of privileged and powerful people being open to listening to the voices of those who have been pushed to the margins, giving space to center those voices, re-examining old assumptions about how the world works or how it should work, becoming aware of how our privilege blinds us to the truth of things, perhaps as Oedipus himself was blinded. In the pursuit of being so-called good liberals, that is, being open-minded, we Unitarian Universalists have, perhaps to our own detriment, lost sight of the importance of certainty. Certainty. That is a dangerous concept, certainly. As Unitarian Universalists, we often worry about having too much certainty, but perhaps we also ought to worry about having too little. And in these times we find ourselves especially, I think each of us need to know what we are certain of. That is, what is at the core of our identity. In my own personal, free, and responsible search for truth and meaning within this Unitarian Universalist faith, there are certain certainties that I have come to, conclusions that I have reached, things that I believe with my whole heart. And this morning, I'd like to share a few of those with you, not in order to coerce you into believing like I do. I understand I'm the minister here. I understand this pulpit gives me a slightly louder voice. But my personal conclusions being shared is not meant to tell you what to believe. In the words of UU theologian James Luther Adams, whom Thomas quoted earlier this morning, we are intentionally inclusive of dissent around here. But what I'm doing is I'm providing these personal certainties not to proselytize you, but to be real with you, to show you my heart, to show you where my passions lie, and hopefully inspire each of you to think about what your certainties are. First, I believe with my whole heart that the world is a good, beautiful, wonderful place, and I'm filled with great hope when I think of its future. And I also believe with my whole heart that the world is an evil, ugly, hate-filled place, and I often have great fear for its future. I believe the greatest threat to human progress and the root of much oppression in our world is nihilism. But I have my own definition for that. As I see it, nihilists aren't just people who don't believe in anything. My operational definition of a nihilist is someone who doesn't believe in anything greater than himself or herself. Nihilists, then, are unwilling to serve any greater purpose because in their minds there is no greater purpose more worthy than serving the self. It's metaphysical narcissism. So by my definition that I'm using, there are, in fact, for example, some Christian nihilists. That would be those Christians whose conception of Jesus serves them rather than them serving their conception of Jesus. Likewise, there are Muslim nihilists, Buddhist nihilists, Unitarian Universalist nihilists. I believe in sin. But again, I have my own personal definition of that. I don't think of sin as something that violates the law of a literal anthropomorphic God living among the clouds. That's not what sin is to me. Rather, I think of sin as anything that stands as an affront to all that is good and holy and sacred in the world, all that is worth living for. And so with that definition in mind, I absolutely believe, for example, racism is sin. And I also believe that racism comes in many shapes and forms. And I believe the most dangerous forms don't carry swastikas or wear white hoods. I believe the most dangerous racism is the subtle, invisible racism so many of us are blind to. For example, the kind of racism deeply embedded in the culture of organizations like a church, such that it unwittingly sends an unconscious but clear message to people of color that in order to be fully accepted around here, you essentially need to first become white. I believe all forms of oppression are sin, whether we are talking about the patriarchy, heteronormativity, persecution of trans individuals, discrimination against immigrants, against religious minorities, ableism, mass economic inequality. And if indeed all these are sins, then I believe that we as UUs must develop a theology and doctrine of atonement. And in that teaching, we must find room for grace. I believe that for a liberal faith like ours to truly live up to its name, it must strive to be more than just open-minded. The word liberal shares a root with the word liberation. To be true to ourselves, to claim and embrace our identity, Unitarian Universalism must be a faith of liberation. And that liberation is needed by all of us because oppression binds and harms everyone, both oppressor and oppressed. White supremacy has destroyed the souls, hollowed out the spiritual core of those who believe themselves to be white, to use the vernacular of Ta-Nehisi Coates. In white folks, white supremacy and white supremacist values and attitudes have led to rage, depression, shame, hopelessness, feelings of alienation, and increased suicide rates. Similarly, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, these have created a culture of toxic masculinity that is stunting emotional development in boys and literally killing men. Though our chains are certainly different and the impacts fall disproportionately, we are nevertheless all bound by this darkness. As the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. so eloquently put it, we are tied together in the single garment of destiny, caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. Or as our own seventh principle says, we are part of an interdependent web that includes all existence. So the only way out is together. In the face of oppression, I believe wholeheartedly in the power and efficacy of resistance. And I believe that a perfectly good and natural reaction to such oppression is anger and rage. But I also believe that an effective long-term resistance movement cannot be sustained on the quick burning fires of anger and rage alone. It must be coupled with a profound spirituality, deep reservoirs of inner tranquility, overflowing fountains of joy, an ocean of endless waves of love. So that means as Unitarian Universalists, as a people of faith, we have got to start singing a little louder. We have got to dance a little longer. We have to learn how to love a little harder, express gratitude a little more often, spend more moments lost in awe and wonder before the face of creation. I believe, rather I know, that this is what my faith calls me to do. I know that this is the cause, the purpose greater than myself that I will dedicate my life to. Through my faith, I have come to better understand who I am. May it be so for you as well. May we all together come to better understand who we are as a people of faith, which will require us to embrace both the uncertainties and the certainties at the core of our being. Blessed be.